G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you are having a fantastic Monday. For all of those that notice how much better I looked in yesterday's video compared to the one before, thank you very much. I'm actually recovering off the last round of chemotherapy reasonably well, all things considered. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. Of course, we're going to be looking at the maps. We're going to be comparing maps. We're going to look at geolocations as usual, but we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into some areas on the front line and how there is an amount of critical areas, there's an amount of exhaustion, and some areas where there was parity at best has now then moved to have a superiority in some sectors as well. And we'll talk about the danger on other sectors now picking up. And we need to talk about then Kherson. We need to look that Russia is targeting that bridge that we spoke about yesterday continuously with FABs. As well, we'll then speak at length about the US, what Washington is saying, what New Delhi is saying, what Beijing is saying about Russian oil, where there are sabers being rattled, where there's muscles being flexes, but there is also bluffs being called. We'll look at what Beijing is saying about this. So, of course, a lot as always to go over. So let's start in Kherson. Now, we'll move on to the maps. We'll zoom in down here and we can see where Kherson is split into. We have the Russian-controlled area, the Ukrainian-controlled area, and it's this bridge right where my cursor is that was and has been getting impacted primarily by Russian glide bombs. Bridges are very, very difficult to take down. First and foremost, it's a bridge. It's meant to stay up. You also have, in some levels, kinetic energy working for and against you at the same time. A lot of the time with missiles or glide bombs or even artillery, we find that some of these weapon systems punch through the bridge and explode on the other side, not dispersing that energy of the actual explosion into any of the critical infrastructure below, actually holding that up. As well, say what you will about the Soviet Union, my God, they could build a bloody bridge. And of course, this is what is connecting this area over here, this island, if you will, of a suburb of Kherson. So let's look further at this. Of course, we looked at those strikes yesterday from Russian glide bombs, and today is no different. We have a volley of 4 glide bombs here with 2 missing, 1 hitting in the suburb, 1 landing in the water, then 2 more with direct impacts on this bridge. Now, when the Western media talk about a weapon system, they are either talking about an AR-15 or an AK-47. There's no variance in other weapons. Other weapons do not exist. And it does seem that Russian media, Russian bloggers, if you will, there's nothing else than a Fab 3000. I can tell you this is definitely not a Fab 3000. Google, or I'll put it here, Vovchansk Fab 3000. That will give you an idea of the size between that and what we are seeing here. But the bridge is still holding up. You can see where some of these impacts have landed. And further strikes on this area as well. You can see the fires in the surrounding areas of Kherson. There's been further strikes as well into Kherson itself, same as artillery. And this has many, many people asking the question, and asking the question of myself, is Russia preparing this area for a crossing to create a bridgehead to then push further into Kherson? Of course, an area of which Russia, they have annexed, they've taken it, and they have said that it is theirs, although not occupying anything on the northern side or the right bank of the Dnieper River. Now, first off the bat, at this point in time, I don't think there's enough of disparity in level of degradation of forces for then a push across the Dnieper River for Russia at this point in time. It would be very, very costly. Again, bodies of water are the most difficult obstacle for land forces. It is very, very tough. I know there's other bloggers who have never served in the military or have never served in combat units. They think that you can just wrap your bloody pack in a tarp and swim across, or an amphibious vehicle just means you're just driving into water and out the other side. Forget about logistics, forget about drones, forget about artillery, forget about how far you can actually push before you're out of your friendly bubble of protective systems as well. But could we be seeing preparation for this? And Russia does have battlefield command at the moment. What I mean by that is they've got command of authority, meaning wherever they choose to make ground, they can make ground. They may be losing some ground around Kherson. They may be losing some ground around maybe Kamianske. There may be movements like that. But if they choose to have that allocation of resources, they have the authority of command to then move that ground if they will. And if they wanted to make ground in Kherson, the cost of it would be incredibly high, but they may be able to do it. But there was another post that I thought it could be the time we see an opening like this. Aiden or @Squatsons on X said this: I think the first time since Mariupol that two cities are being fought over the same time. And what he's referring to is Kupiansk, which is a very large city, and then Pokrovsk as well. And if you are going to cross the Dnieper River, we know Ukraine is very tight up. They are putting a lot of resources, especially into Pokrovsk, because that is a very critical area. And following on from Pokrovsk, we do not know what we would see from there. It could be catastrophic. It has all the pieces to be catastrophic if Pokrovsk does fall. We'll talk more about that in a second. It's not just going to be another city fall, as well as Kupiansk. There's a lot of resources tied up in here, and could it be the time where we see, while that is occurring, another pronged push and taking an opportunity to cross the Dnieper into Kherson? Again, at this point in time, I don't think that the Russian command would be saying Ukraine is degraded enough, particularly the manpower or drones, which that has an effect on itself, to push across here, but we may see. So let's look at the maps. Let's talk about the front line. Let's look at what is happening. Now, first off the bat, I wanted to show you this. I spoke of it yesterday. The slide wasn't there, but we did mention it. We are looking at the changes for July, and we're looking at the Russian advances and the Ukrainian advancements. And this was the interesting part, that Ukrainian advances were up by 200% when you compare to the month before. And most of this, of course, was in Kharkiv and Sumy Oblast, according to Ukraine. They have encounters in there and have had success moving in areas as well. We can see where Russia is having success in Donetsk and Kharkiv. So let's have a look at the data, and I've got more of the data here because this tells another story completely. So let's have a look. We're looking, of course, at July. We're looking at August, and we can see that July, June were very similar. The months prior, this is where these numbers get a little bit skewed. These numbers were likely more similar to the months we have just gone through, due to this is not including then areas where Ukraine occupied into Russia, like Kursk, and the pushing out of there. But what's more interesting, and why we need to look at this, is going back months as well. And this gives us an idea of the relative speed. So in June, we see that by Deep State's own numbers, it was more than 5 times. And we see again, it's around this 4 or 5 times then from July to then July over 24 to 25 as well. And this is then, it's not only continuing that grind forward, but it is speeding up as well. So we'll wait and see what the August numbers bring. Depending on what happens in Pokrovsk, depending on the fault next week's, it may be very large or it may be very small. If the focus is the attritional envelopment of Kupiansk, Pokrovsk and Seversk as well, I wouldn't be surprised to see August being a very small months in kilometre squares, and then the following months being very large. Again, warfare, attritional warfare, is not linear, it is not constant, and the territory gained or lost is a byproduct of attrition first and foremost. So let's have a look at the maps, and we'll talk about some areas as well. Now, this was a very good military analysis here from a French general, this Oliver Kempf. Now, if anyone has any contact with him, please reach out. I'd like to interview him. And it was by this website here. He's a doctor of political science researcher, cyber strategy, so beyond your typical online blogger. He speaks about the ground being made over the past fortnight, and he says there's no major movement for the past 2 weeks, except for an increasingly precarious situation in Ukraine. The situation in Pokrovsk is probably more serious than reported above. So more serious than the data we display of kilometre squares. It is plausible that the Ukrainians have abandoned the south of the city. There are reports today off Ukrainian pages saying, quote, there's Russians walking around the city in the south. We'll talk more about this. The situation around it is no better. The last acres of Donetsk Oblast to the south are taken by the Russians, with openings to Zaporizhia. This is new. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast to the north. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast to the north. The advance toward Rodensky threatens one of the 2 last routes into the city. It appears doomed. So let's have a look at Rodensky as well. So of course we'll come down into then Pokrovsk sector. We see where this envelopment is now occurring, and this is where Rodensky is sitting. And we can see the envelopment around here and this northern push coming around onto Rodensky as well, and threatening those last final areas to get into Pokrovsk, and this bypassing as well that is occurring. And this is a write-up that Mr. Playfra did about Rodensky. The road to the town is about a 50% survival chance. But despite this, evacuations are continuing there. The Russian DRG's sabotage reconnaissance elements are running in Rodensky too, as in Pokrovsk and Minograd. The main thing there is the fact that Russians control the sky 100% in that area and are currently advancing a lot. The most dangerous thing for the Ukrainians as of now is if the Russians will be able to bypass Rodensky from one side and get into their rear. If that happens, it's basically over. So pushing around, bypassing Rodensky, cutting off these areas in, and of course, the threat that this then puts and the pressure on Minograd and Pokrovsk itself. There's movement into Pokrovsk on the south and attempting to bypass on Rodensky as well. You can see from the grey zone here. In that direction was sent an unspecified airborne assault brigade, but the Russians have a big advantage in people and drones in that sector. The fate of Pokrovsk and Minograd is being decided right now in Rodensky. Of course, what will occur in Pokrovsk will be decided in Rodensky, and many people are saying the front line is holding here, and they're not looking at the amount of resources that Ukraine is allocating from other areas into this area. And this is why we'll see movement around Siversk, because while we may see movement around Kupiansk, and why some people are saying we may even see something down in Kherson. So keep an eye on what is happening here. The only question is when? End of summer or end of the year? In view of the last few days, we fear leaning towards the former hypothesis, so sooner rather than later. The fall of Pokrovsk would be anything but trivial. Although people will say it's strategically unimportant, they'll frame it however they will, or they'll focus on a small advance of one town in the north or south and ignore what is happening here. It will be nothing but trivial. First of all, it would be the largest city in the Donbass to fall since the start of the war. Above all, there is nothing behind it. We've spoken about this before, the open area and how we could see the fall of Pokrovsk and then a very large step forward. And we don't know about the defensive works. We don't know about the manpower behind in those fortifications as well. We've seen that step. We've seen Velika fall, the step. Avdiivka fall, then the step. The problem is that step has to end somewhere where there's resistance, so wait out on that. It constituted the last urban defensive pier behind the fortification line that had been established in 2014. In a very densely populated region, the fortifications hastily constructed in the rear in open terrain are hardly reassuring. Further north, near Konstantinivka, the situation is also deteriorating. Positions south of the reservoir are expected to fall within 10 days, given that the first Russian units are already within sight of the city. So we're moving just to the northeast of here and Konstantinivka. I showed you yesterday the FABs landing in here and the ability to vertically envelop somewhere like Konstantinivka, further exacerbating the attrition rate of these pockets that have been formed. Above all, they will push to the west, again to cut off supply lines. I think that, unlike Bakhmut or recently Chasiv Yar, the Russians will not want to take the city by force, but lay siege to it while launching security raids inside, as we're seeing in Pokrovsk, as per the strategy we are seeing unfold in an attritional nature of warfare, and your security elements, paint by numbers, triple choke, whatever you'd like to call it. Further north, the Russians are slowly preparing a major movement, not only around Seversk, but also in the Kremenar forest. So let's move up into this area, of course, where we are seeing areas in Seversk move. We can see further confirmation today by Deep State Map. They are confirming where Russia has moved some 5.7 kilometres. Again, if you don't think that's a large advancement, the Ukrainian 23 counteroffensive got about 8 kilometres, or go and walk 5.5 kilometres in a straight line. You'll get an idea, but we can see movement in areas we haven't seen for some time. And of course, around Verkhonomayanske, Serbianka, I'll show you a geolocation when we actually really look at the maps in here. The objective is clearly to reach Liman to influence the south of Slavyansk, which will be a target for next year. So we can see this movement around into Liman, Slavyansk. We see that Terny is also pushing on this sector. We'll talk more about Terny in a second. So we can see that's that authority of movement that I'm speaking about. They can move where they want to move, but some other areas may be left more thin due to wanting to move in different sectors. But the ones controlling the battlefield at the moment are the Russians objectively. All other activities, Kamyanske on the Dnieper, the siege of Kupiansk, the resumption of activity on the Kharkiv front, or the fighting towards Sumy, serve only one purpose: to exhaust the Ukrainian army. So movement in Kharkiv, movement in Sumy. I somewhat think the siege of Kupiansk could be a lot more than just exhaustion too, but the other front lines, the secondary front lines, tertiary fronts, whatever you want to call it, these are for further exhaustion. And potentially, if Russia was able to get a small foothold somewhere across in Kherson, the threat of Russia getting on the right bank of the Dnieper and the political influence that would have, because when Putin says his goals are around wanting to take these 4 oblasts, the biggest pushback on that is, well, you don't hold a single square metre on the right bank of the Dnieper. So if they were able to get some level of foothold, even if it was just the equivalent of what the Ukrainians held around Krinky at one point, although we know that was catastrophically costly, the amount of resources that would have to be allocated to that, and at the moment we know Ukraine's defences are very, very thin, the allocation of resource is not going to be coming off some mythical base somewhere, it's going to be coming off a front line, and as what's his last name? Sorry, Mr. Kemp says, is the goal is exhaustion, and then you will gain territory through that. Now, this continues on what he's talking about too. Worse still, there's a feeling the Russians are winning the drone war. Tactically, a drone is needed to operate drone pilots. So you still need a pilot. However, this human resource that there is beginning to be lacking among the Ukrainians, especially since Russians have likely developed drone hunting tactics. So looking for the operators, looking for manufacturing, all of that. And this is what we have said, and I've said this again and again, where Russia's attritional strategy will start affecting other pieces like air defense. The best way to influence Ukrainian air defense, firstly, may be firing more drones and missiles in, but secondly is the attrition rate at the front line. We know Ukraine is moving people from the Air Force, from air defense, everything, onto the front line, because first and foremost, regardless of how much people like to ignore the front line, the infantry is the most important sector to maintain the manning, supported, of course, by drones. Technically, the Russians have made great progress, and the innovation advantage, initially held by the Ukrainians, seemed to have passed to the Russians. That passed in Kursk with the fibre optic drone. I think there was a degree of complacency with that and didn't push more on that innovation and tactics advantage, and we saw that then flip, and it's maintained, in my opinion, looking at the footage as well. First with the tethered drones, and now with anti-electronic warfare devices that are taking over Ukrainian loitering aerial drones. And we see more and more of this as well. And this is something that we did speak about, is we can see Russian Loya drones carrying in, on this new bit of footage, this is carrying in a Mavic drone, but we have seen these carrying in FPVs as well. And we are unsure exactly how this is working, but it does seem to be working as a repeater station as well to get further range on these. Finally, industrially, the Russians have clearly surpassed the Ukrainians in production volume, which means that the ratio of aerial precision drones is now turning in their favour, and long-range drones as well. This development is critical since the Ukrainian army had survived an unfavourable force ratio for 18 months thanks to its tactical innovation in drones. However, in this area too, the Russians have learned and decided on tactical adaptations, the decentralised combat on motorcycles that moving away from armour, or on the drone front itself today, give them the advantage on the ground. The observer thus has the impression that Ukrainian fighters are still managing to defend what they can, but at their limit, regularly being surprised locally and forced to give in, that movement that we see. But what worked for months and allowed the Ukrainian army to slow the enemy's advance seems to be reaching its limits. And it does seem that there is an overall exhaustion happening everywhere. And if it's not Pokrovsk, then it may be Kamyansk, and if it's not Kamyansk, maybe it could be Kupiansk. And this is the thing. And I was speaking to a friend very in the know about this, and he would say, well, will it be this? And I said, well, we didn't know if it was going to be Velika or Avdiivka or this or this or this, but at some point something has to give, unless there can be a very large turning of tides, which requires unbelievable manpower as well. So we'll just talk about Kamyansk just for a second, because this is Kamyansk down in here. Sorry if I referred to it and you didn't know what we're talking about. This is down in the south, where we have seen then Russia move. There has been Ukrainian counters, but according to Syriac maps, there has been further Russian movement and recapturing of areas today, further into areas like Stepnohursk, as well as some area where Ukraine has pushed back also. So let's then talk about tourney. And we talk about exhaustion, we talk about tactics on the front line, and we see a lot like this that skews obviously many people's vision of this war. And this is talking about this area, a new record, 66-1 kill ratio. What I would say is if there is a 14-1, 12-1, whatever bloody Trump is saying, or 66-1, the front line would look very different. It wouldn't be Russia then advancing. So what they speak about is this is ancient Roman tactics, okay, whatever. But talking that this area in here is overextended and that this is creating that massive kill area. And what I would say is, well, then look slightly north, because, yeah, this may be overextended. And this is why I've said in this sector exactly why the Russians are focusing to push south and push north, because by doing that and making this fatter, you desaturate the drone elements that Ukraine can target, or the artillery elements too. But what this is completely ignoring is, why are the Russians pushing in here even if they may be somewhat overextended? Well, you've got the Oskil pushing right down here, you've got control authority of the front through here, and what pushes in this sector as well. This is where purposefully leaving things out to set a narrative, and I believe that this is incredibly dangerous. We see a little bit more of this today. We see from this very popular blogger here. Zaluzny is spot on. Russian casualty numbers cited by Trump and Root are irrelevant. Not only are they irrelevant, they are also incredibly false. If these were real, we would not see it being Ukraine that is physically dragging men off the street, relying 100% on conscription at the moment, moving from vital sectors to there too. But Mariskia says, Moscow would gain millions of conscripts and vast resources if Kyiv falls. Either integrate Ukraine's army into the European army, or they'll be integrated into the Russian army. Now, what I will say to this, if Moscow take Kyiv, well, that's a very long way away, and dealing with things like insurgency would be unbelievably costly. But these people in Kyiv at the moment, they are currently not willing to sign up to fight for Ukraine. They are actively avoiding then conscription. If they're not willing to fight for Ukraine right now, what makes you believe that then instantly they will just fight for Russia by the millions? But what Zaluzny has said, today we're the largest and most combat-ready army on the European continent. Russia is the largest and most combat-ready army on the continent. Russia has more experience on offensive operations than any other military in the world on conventional movements on the front line. Ukraine has majority of the time been in defence and localised offensive operations, but the statement that is objectively incorrect unless you don't consider Russia to be part of Europe at all, which is geographically incorrect. Yes, it's got a lot in Asia as well, but Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc. So I think it's important to push back on bits and pieces like this. It sets pseudo environments, and I believe that is very, very dangerous. So we've based out what we're seeing unfolding on the front line at the moment. Let's actually look at and see where bits and pieces are moving. So let's talk about Seversk. We can see where on the Terny area where Deep State is showing up to date with the geolocations we had yesterday. Still not up to date in the Kremenar Forest as per geolocations at least a fortnight ago on this sector, but not up to date with other geolocations that we have today either. So we have to here, we have out from Verkhono-Mayanske. We use this as a reference point. This reservoir is right about here. We can see there are Russian forces on clearing operations in these sectors. So right out into here. So this would be some from the red zone, if I can, sorry, wrong tool, here to here, some 2.83 kilometres, but right on the outskirts, less than a mile, maybe 1.4 kilometres away from Seversk itself, while they're making ground in multiple areas on the north. Keep an eye on this as an area for exhaustion and opportunity due to that resource allocation away also. Let's move our way down, of course, into Pokrovsk area, where we are seeing pages today saying in the south there's suggestion there may be withdrawal and then Russians, quote, walking around. So let's look at some geolocations in here. We have this Chunishine as well. We see this flag going up right here, and this is geolocated right to there. We shrink this just into that sector, likely red at this point in time. And then we'll come onto the Velika Novosilkia front line. If you will, we'll see this is somewhat combining front lines here. We see Russia making more ground in the direction of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Velika Novosilka, no ground being shown in the north, a lot of ground being made on the due west of here, and Tamarivkia, Zeleny Pole. Let's have a look and see what Suryak Maps is saying about this. I've had to screenshot it a little bit weird. So let's have a look right in here, and this is talking right around this sector. So we know around Zeleny Pole there's definitely some ground being made, but he's also suggesting around Obratne as well, Tamarivkia front, that there has been pushing back. Now this map doesn't really show it, so we'll just use a bit of mapped ground so you can see where this reservoir is. Then this sort of straight southeastern reservoir is right in here. Tamarivkia showing mostly under control as per the geolocations, but showing that Ukraine did make back some ground in there and pushing on the north. Again, those movements, because it never showed the extreme, is not going to be shown on the Suryak maps. As well, we'll talk into the north around Ivanivka. We can see the makeup of the front line here. We see, as per Suryak, here suggesting around Zeleny Hay, there has been then map corrections and Ukraine pushing back in these areas. Again, not shown on this map, but weighed out on, I believe, this map to catch up around Murnay Komar areas also. So that will then finish our maps for today. I believe I've got everything in that. I know that was a little bit all over the place. Now, step on to more the political front of this. We have top Trump aide accuses India of financing Russia's war in Ukraine. Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff to the White House, and one of Trump's most influential aides, has said what Trump said very clearly is that it is not acceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing the oil from Russia. As well, saying people will be shocked to learn that India is basically tied with China in purchasing Russian oil. That's an astonishing fact. What we see is a 25% tariff on Indian products went into effect on Friday as a result of purchase of military equipment and energy from Russia. Trump has also threatened 100% tariffs on US imports from countries that buy Russian oil unless Moscow reaches a major peace deal with Ukraine. What people leave out of this is not only, okay, Russia buying crude, but where is that going? Because I know a lot of it comes into Australia, a lot of it goes into the Netherlands and then into the EU as well. That needs to be looked at, and the flow-on effect of what these tariffs will have. S&P is not going fantastically the past couple of days. But there is a lot of consensus around political speakers that Washington is using the threat of tariffs due to Russian oil and purchase of military equipment in a way to leverage India in unrelated trade discussions, tariffs as well. And so far, it doesn't seem that India is budging. Not only is New Delhi not budging, it doesn't seem that China is buying this either. This Gao Jiakan, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, has said this in response to US suggestion that it will significantly raise tariffs if China continues to purchase Russian oil. This was back on Wednesday, July the 30th, but it's still relevant to this whole discussion. China will always ensure its energy supply in ways that serve a national interest. Goes on to that, reason of state, states will always look at their primary interests first. Tariff wars have no winners. Coercion and pressuring will not achieve anything. China will firmly defend its sovereignty, security, and development interest. Tu Zhangwei, the director of China's Institute to World Trade Organization, has said if the US is bent on imposing tariffs, China will fight to the end. And this is China's consistent official stance. And it does seem that both Beijing, New Delhi, China, India, that they suspect that Trump is not willing to actually follow through on this, that they are somewhat calling the bluff due to what will occur to oil prices, other sectors, and the cementing of alliances like BRICS as well. ABC News, they've reported today, this Danny Russell, a distinguished fellow at Asian Society Policy Institute, said Beijing now sees itself as the one holding the cards in its struggle with Washington. He said Trump has made it clear he wants a headline-grabbing deal with Xi. So rejecting a US demand to stop buying oil from Iran or Russia is probably not seen as a deal breaker, even if it generates friction and delay. He continues saying Beijing simply can't afford to walk away from the oil from Russia and Iran. It's too important strategic energy supply for Beijing is buying it at fire sale prices. And this is what a lot of Indian officials are reportedly pushing back on, is they are saying that we are purchasing Russian oil within the original framework of the price caps to not create cold water shock, massive oil spikes or massive dips due to then flooding the market with oil. We're doing it as per the original framework. Now you've moved the goalposts and we are not a fan of that. So again, I'll leave it up to you guys in the comments. Is Trump, it's coming around to the 8th is Friday or Saturday, so it is the weekend, so it will have maybe less effect on markets, but we will see. Is Trump really going to, as per ultimatums, secondary tariff sanctions can operate very similar ways, or are we seeing both India and China calling a bluff here and there's not really the appetite to do it, and the appetite to massively hit that most affected will likely be the European Union on oil prices? Again, we will see. I know the Brent crude's down about 4% today, or at least yesterday, whenever it was updated. But legends, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.